Much of what we talk about here in the next few hours will be battles, and people will get killed. And so lots of people don't like that as greatness, and that is true. Often battles are not all that exciting. So what is it we might say about him that explains the great, Alexander the Great? Well, the first thing is he did more than probably any other human being ever has in 33 years. I don't think there's any other historical figure that has such a short life, 33 years, and does so much. So that's pretty great right to start with. Number two, he is the first person that we know about to think about the ecumenical reality of the globe. That is one world. Alexander had a very clear idea, ecumenical, that is one world, and his idea was that he would go to the ends of the earth, he would go all the way to the very edge, and as far as he knew, the edge was at the edge of India, and when he died, at maybe 60 or 70 or 80, he would have unified that world. Now you're all going to say, oh yeah, conquer it. No, not just conquer it, it included conquer, but bring cultures together, unify, often in a fairly sophisticated way. Like, for example, in Babylon, when he was in Babylon, that is Iran, he was in Iraq, present-day Iraq, he sponsored a mass intermarriage between Greeks and Persians. That was his idea, that he would bring the whole culture together by having many thousand Greek soldiers marry Persian women. So his idea often went beyond just conquest. And if he'd had a longer time, who knows how unified it would have all been. The fact is, of course, that when he died in 323, and it's easy to remember 323 because you have two dates on two sides of zero, you see. On the one side, 323, death of Alexander, and on the other side, 313. What happened in 313? Edict of Milan. Constantine makes Christianity legal. So you have two major milestones, 323 BC, 313 AD, and then you just remember them together, and now you've got 600 years, right? See, you got 600 years all organized. So one thing is the ecumenical view, the view of the world as possibly being brought together. This was a radical, progressive, extraordinary idea. No one else thought like that. Certainly nobody in India, nobody in Persia, nobody in Egypt. In these moments in the ancient world, the leaders of ancient cultures were very insular. Their culture was the best, and there was absolutely no reason they should have anything to do with any of the other ones except to sell things to them. But the rest of it, there was no point. So Alexander, in a sense, is a trailblazer, a thinker, a philosophical thinker, a world thinker. Now, in pursuant of his ecumenical world, he gave the world something that nobody else ever did. And the repercussions go on, I think it's fair to say they still go on today. What he gave the world and what he left behind more than any other thing was the Greek language. That's it. That's the biggest. When we look at the map and as we think about the Mediterranean world and the larger world in which he's living, one of the results of his life's work is to take Greek all over the world, throughout the Mediterranean, North Africa, Egypt, Middle East, Iran and Iraq, Afghanistan, high deserts, and India, and then all the way back to Babylon and to Iran and Iraq. So that when he died in 323, he had left behind the Greek language in all these places. Now, the result of that was that during the next 2,000 years, right up to us, Greek became a kind of language of the cultured in all parts of not just the Mediterranean, but into Iran, Iraq, and India too. And so this meant that in the next 1,000 years, let's just say 1,000, from Alexander through the Roman Empire and into the post-Roman Empire, Greek became the vehicle through which the entire Greek cultural heritage, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, passed to future ages. It's through the Greek language that all these places could pass the knowledge of Aristotle, Plato, and everybody else on to later periods. And that vehicle is not just in Greece or even in Asia Minor, but it's in Iran and Iraq. It's in Baghdad. And so for 1,000 years, Arab Islamic scholars are going to read Aristotle just like Byzantine scholars in Constantinople and Roman scholars in Rome and Sicilian scholars in Sicily and Carthaginians. In other words, ecumenical, worldwide. The knowledge of the ancient Greek world was going to pass forward for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years through all these different places, first to Rome, of course, and then from Rome in the Renaissance revived, and then from the Renaissance into the 17th century, the 18th century, the 19th century, and right to the present time. So Greek all by itself, if that's all he had done, if his troops and his armies had only moved us through the Mediterranean world with the Greek language, if that's the only thing he did, it would be extraordinary. Here's our map of the journey. As you can see, is extraordinary. It's hard to believe. The first thing is to just talk a little bit about him. Alexander was born extraordinary. He was born royal. He was born the son of the king of Macedon. And so he started out as a special person. Everything about him was special all during his 33 years. First of all, as you can see, and I'll show you a variety of pictures here, he was beautiful. Now, I hope you can all pick that up by looking at this. Probably the most beautiful, powerful figure in history. I would say probably Julius Caesar was very handsome, but it doesn't quite reach all this almost godlike. People called him godlike, of course. This is the Pergamon head, which is in Istanbul, and you're going to see it a lot of times tonight because it's the best. It's the best sculpted image of him, and it's reproduced many, many different places. It's painted, and it's the same head exactly. So this is a good way to think of him and think of what he looked like, the Pergamon head. First of all, he was brilliant. He was born brilliant. His parents were both extraordinary and brilliant and interesting and high-energy people. And so he started out with an intellectual capacity. And if you wonder whether I'm exaggerating, just remember his tutor was Aristotle. Aristotle. Now, how about that? That's pretty good. The most brilliant man in the world, maybe ever, was his tutor. And for 3 years, he lived and worked and studied constantly with Aristotle. So, number one, he was brilliant. Number two, he was just born with an almost inexhaustible energy. So when all these soldiers would be on campaign and they'd be, down the roads and roads and roads and roads, Alexander would be exercising as they went down. He'd be jumping on and off the cart. He would have a cart, and he would run, then he'd jump on the cart and do one leg, then he would jump off the cart. And so he was exercising while everybody else was just trying to get down the road. He was almost mystical in the things that people noticed about him. Number one, everybody noticed that he smelled good. Don't you love that? I mean, think about that in an age when everybody smelled awful. Everybody smelled awful. People didn't take baths. They couldn't take baths. They smelled terrible all the time. And Alexander just gave off a wonderful aroma. You got close to him, and people said, "What's that wonderful smell?" Oh, that's Alexander. People noticed another thing, which, of course, in his time was not true of most people, that he had a delicious smelling breath. Well, now in time when everybody had rotten teeth, it was almost impossible to have a sweet-smelling breath, but Alexander had a sweet-smelling breath. he was really almost clairvoyant. So in his dealing with people, he could almost always read right through, even before anybody told him very much about them. The stories about him, one after another, are always containing this magical aura that people immediately liked. People liked him, and people wanted to be with him, and people wanted to be around him. Men wanted to be like him. Women wanted to have him. This is another photograph of the Pergamon head in the, here's a different, there's hundreds of images of him, hundreds. Sculpted in Persia, sculpted in Iraq, sculpted in the Middle East. And then a lot of them are in the museums of the Middle East. Look at that. That's a coin. Look at the hair. Isn't that great? Look at that beautiful head. Yeah, how about that profile? Yeah, a lot of hair. Here he is on Bucephalus, his wonderful horse that he loves so much. There's so many images of him in the museums of the world. Now, the very first thing that comes up for all of us is, how do we know all of the stuff that I'm going to tell you about tonight? How do we know it? Well, this is the most important reason that we know it, and this is an author named Arrian, A-R-R-I-A-N. Arrian was a 2nd century Roman period, so 2nd century A.D., bilingual Latin, Greek, a Greek person born in the Greek part, in the east part of the Mediterranean. He'd been a general, he'd been a military figure, and then later in his life he devoted himself to this book on Alexander. He said it was the most important thing that he was going to do, and so he worked for years and years and years. Dates are 86 to 160. The book was written, and you can get it in a Penguin Classic. It's available to you, The Campaigns of Alexander. The reason that it's so important to us is that he could still read the books that had been written about Alexander by Alexander's best friends. So there were 3 or 4 intimate friends of Alexander. Number 1, his lifelong friend Ptolemy, P-T-O-L-E-M-Y, who became the ruler of Egypt. And another great friend who was the head of his navy, Nearchos, and then several other people who wrote major books in the period after he died about him. And those books survived. So they survived 300 years, 400 years, and they survived into the time of Arrian. Now they're gone. We've lost them. But fortunately for us, this man, particularly interested in Alexander, and so he worked on this biography for years and years and years, and towards the end of his life, he felt he had completed it. So that's the first thing, is Arrian, A-R-R-I-A-N. If you want to read it, you can get it. It's a good, the Penguin is a very good edition. And so that's one of the ways that we know about him. This is probably the best great biography out right now in English. Peter Green, I have it right here, and it's up on the screen. It's a wonderful book. He first published it in 1970, been working all his life on the period and on Alexander, and it's been updated a number of times, so it's a great version of the Alexandrian story. And then a third person that I want to mention to you, Mary Renault. Mary Renault, that was her pen name. Her real name was Eileen Chalens. She was an English lady who moved to South Africa, wrote in South Africa for a period of time. But she was a great researcher and a great novelist. And she chose historical fiction as her field, and she specialized in Greece, so she studied Greece. She knew everything about Greece. And then she devoted her life, really, to writing great historical fiction, including these 3 novels about Alexander. And I can tell you, nothing is better to read about Alexander than these 3 novels. They're just so good, so captivating, so beautifully done. Fire from Heaven is about this young, explosive figure, Persian boy, and then the end, and the period right after Funeral Games. This is Arrian's comment about Alexander. For him, he was furious at anyone who interfered with the admiration of Alexander. And so he said, it is my belief that there was, in those days, no nation, no city, no single individual beyond the reach of Alexander's name. Never in all the world was there another like him. In other words, one of the things about Alexander is that he's the best known person ever in history to that time, the best known person.